She had never been near a horse before. No one in her family had ever been particularly fond of animals. They didn't live on a farm, and horseback riding was something she had only seen in movies or heard about in stories. It was a world completely foreign to her, one she had never imagined herself stepping into. But one fateful afternoon, everything was about to change. The sun hung lazily in the sky, casting long shadows across the field. The gentle breeze rustled through the leaves of the nearby trees, and there was a quiet hum of life in the air. For most people, it was just another day. But for her, it was the day that would turn her world upside down. She had always felt a sense of curiosity about horses, drawn to their graceful presence, but the thought of actually getting close to one, let alone riding, was something she had never entertained. It seemed like something meant for people with experience, not for someone like her. But that day, an unexpected invitation came her way. It wasn't something she had planned. It wasn't something she had even considered. She found herself standing at the edge of a stable, the smell of hay and leather filling the air, with nothing but doubt and hesitation swirling in her chest. The barn was alive with activity, people laughing, horses neighing, and the rhythmic sound of hooves on the ground. And there she stood, unsure of what to do next, her heart racing as she looked at the magnificent creatures in front of her. The stable owner, a woman with a gentle smile, approached her. She was experienced, calm, and warm, a stark contrast to the uncertainty that gripped her. She had a way of making things seem so easy, like the horses she tended to were just part of the family. She gestured toward one of the horses, a large, strong creature with a coat that shimmered in the sunlight. "Would you like to meet him?" the woman asked, her voice soft but confident. "He's gentle. You have nothing to worry about." At that moment, she felt a wave of doubt wash over her. How could she, a complete stranger to the world of horses, possibly step up to one so large, so majestic? The horse seemed to stand there, waiting, its eyes calm and wise, almost as though it could sense her hesitation. It was overwhelming. And yet, despite the uncertainty, there was a pull of curiosity, a desire to understand what it was like to connect with an animal so powerful, so free. Taking a deep breath, she took her first step forward. Her hands trembled as she reached out to touch the horse's nose, the warmth of its breath against her palm sending a chill through her. The horse lowered its head, as if acknowledging her presence, and she felt an odd sense of calm wash over her. For the first time that day, her fear seemed to fade, replaced by a deep sense of awe and wonder. But just as she was starting to feel a connection, something unexpected happened. The horse, without warning, jerked its head up sharply. Its body tensed, muscles rippling under the sleek coat, as its ears flicked back in alarm. Her heart skipped a beat. She took a step back, not sure what had caused the sudden shift in the animal's demeanor. She had no idea what to do or how to react. The stable owner noticed the change immediately and rushed over, her calm presence steadying the situation. "Don't worry," she reassured, though there was a glimmer of concern in her eyes. "He's just startled. It happens sometimes, especially with someone who's new to horses." But something about the situation didn't sit right. The horse's reaction seemed too sudden, too intense. And as the minutes passed, the tension only grew. Was it the sound of something in the distance? The way the horse had sensed something she couldn't? Her mind raced as she tried to process what was happening, and the air seemed thick with an unsettling energy. What came next was something none of them had expected. Something that would not only change her perception of horses forever but would leave everyone in the barn questioning what they had just witnessed. The horse's behavior became more erratic, its hooves striking the ground with alarming force. For a moment, it seemed as if the animal was about to bolt, sending everyone into a frantic scramble to regain control. But that wasn't the end. The horse did something that stunned everyone present. And as the dust settled, a feeling of awe, fear, and disbelief lingered in the air. What had just happened? And what was it about her, someone with no prior experience, that had triggered such a dramatic response? The questions flooded in, but answers seemed out of reach. The events of that day were far from over. She stood there, heart racing, unsure of what to do next. Had she made a mistake? Was this a sign that she didn't belong in this world? Or was it something more, something far deeper than she could ever have imagined? The tension in the barn was palpable. The air seemed to have thickened, as if the very atmosphere held its breath. The horse, once so calm and curious, now stood rigid, its body still, its eyes wide and unblinking. Every movement of the stable owner, who was carefully walking toward it, seemed deliberate, as if any misstep might set the animal off once again. She looked over her shoulder at the young woman who had been caught in the middle of the startling event. The stable owner's face was unreadable, but there was an edge of concern in her gaze. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice now soft, but carrying a note of urgency. The young woman nodded, though she wasn't sure if she truly was. Her heart still pounded in her chest, her palms were clammy, and her mind raced with questions she didn't have the answers to. What had just happened? Why had the horse reacted like that? It was supposed to be a peaceful visit, an innocent introduction to the world of horses. But now, everything felt different. The very air seemed charged with an energy she couldn't understand. She felt like an outsider, as if she had unknowingly crossed some invisible boundary. The stable owner, still keeping a watchful eye on the horse, took a step closer. Sometimes, horses react to something they sense that we don't. It's not always clear what triggers it. The young woman glanced at the horse again, her eyes narrowing slightly as she tried to make sense of what had happened. There was nothing around them that seemed to explain the sudden outburst. No loud noises, no sudden movements. It was just the two of them, her and the horse, and yet the animal had been visibly spooked. "Do you think it was me?" she asked, her voice shaky but filled with a hint of curiosity. The stable owner paused, considering the question. "I don't know. Sometimes, horses can pick up on emotions, fear, anxiety, even excitement. It could be that something about your presence made him nervous. Or maybe he's just unpredictable. Horses are complex animals." But the words didn't fully reassure her. There was something unsettling in the way the horse had reacted, something that felt more than just simple nervousness. Her own unease deepened as the moments passed. She had expected this encounter to be gentle, to be a connection with nature, but it had felt like something far more intense. The horse's wild energy, the way it had tensed and jerked its head, it all seemed to come out of nowhere. She took a deep breath and tried to push the thoughts away, focusing instead on the present moment. She was here to learn, to understand, not to be afraid. Slowly, she stepped forward again, this time keeping a wider distance between herself and the horse. She didn't want to get too close, not after what had just happened, but she didn't want to leave either. She felt drawn to the animal, almost as though there was something pulling her in. The stable owner noticed the change in her body language. "You don't have to approach him right now if you're not ready. We can give him a few minutes to settle down." The young woman nodded, appreciating the offer. She was grateful for the patience of the stable owner, who seemed to understand the subtle nuances of the animals around her in a way that the young woman couldn't quite grasp. She watched as the stable owner moved towards a nearby stall, taking care of other horses in the area. Her movements were calm and practiced, a quiet confidence in her every step. As the minutes passed, the young woman found herself drawn back to the horse. It was standing still again, though its eyes were still wide, alert. She studied its features, its glossy coat, the gentle curve of its neck, the strong muscles under its skin. There was a beauty in the way it held itself, a silent power that made her feel both humbled and awestruck. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this animal than met the eye. Something beyond just its appearance. The sound of hooves tapping against the ground broke her thoughts. The stable owner had returned, her presence grounding and reassuring. He's calming down now. Would you like to try again? The young woman hesitated. Part of her wanted to walk away, to forget about the encounter and leave this strange new world behind. But another part of her, something deeper, more primal, urged her to stay. What was it about horses that called to her in such a way? Why had she felt so drawn to this animal, even after the unsettling display of energy? I think so, she finally replied, her voice steadying with resolve. The stable owner smiled. All right, let's try again. This time, I'll be right beside you. With that, the stable owner approached the horse, gently placing a hand on its shoulder. The young woman took a cautious step forward, her heart still racing but her curiosity slowly overcoming her fear. She extended her hand, her fingers trembling as she reached toward the horse's nose. This time, the animal didn't jerk away. Instead, it sniffed her hand, its warm breath a welcome sensation against her skin. For a moment, it seemed like the world had paused. The barn, the horses, the very air, it all faded into the background. It was just her and the horse, two beings standing on the edge of something unknown, something that neither of them fully understood. The young woman's pulse slowed, and she felt a quiet connection form between them. Maybe this was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment she finally understood what it was all about. But before she could fully process the moment, something in the distance caught the horse's attention. Its ears flicked back again, its muscles tensing as it shifted its weight. The young woman took a step back, her instincts screaming that something was wrong. The stable owner's hand tightened on the horse's shoulder, but she, too, sensed a shift in energy. Wait, the stable owner whispered, her eyes scanning the barn. Something's not right. The young woman looked around, but all she could see were the other horses, standing quietly in their stalls. There was no sign of anything out of the ordinary. And yet, she felt it too, something was off. The atmosphere was changing again, and it felt like the horse was reacting to something beyond their control. The stable owner's voice broke the silence. I think we should stop for today. This horse isn't ready for anyone to ride him right now. The young woman nodded quickly, the tension in her body rising once again. She was grateful for the stable owner's quick thinking, but part of her still didn't understand what was happening. The day had started off so simple, so ordinary. But now, it felt like they were caught in something much bigger than themselves. Something that neither of them could predict. As they led the horse back to its stall, the young woman couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. It wasn't just about a horse or a simple encounter anymore. Something had shifted inside of her, something she couldn't quite explain. It was as if the horse had opened a door to a world she hadn't known existed, a world filled with mystery, power, and unseen forces. And though she didn't yet understand it, she knew one thing for sure: her life was about to change forever. But what had truly happened? What had caused the horse's strange behavior? And why did she feel so unsettled? The answers were still out of reach, hanging just beyond the horizon. As she walked away from the barn, the questions only grew, the answers slipping further into the shadows. The mystery was far from over, and something told her that the next time she crossed paths with this horse, everything would be different. The young woman walked slowly away from the barn, her mind tangled with confusion and a growing sense of unease. The sounds of the other horses, the distant neighing and the rhythmic tapping of hooves on the stable floor, faded as she moved further from the building. The sun had dipped lower in the sky, casting a soft orange glow across the fields. The world around her seemed calm, almost too calm, but within her, the tension was still thick, pulling at her every thought. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting to unfold. Something bigger than just a misstep with a horse. As she reached her car, she paused. The keys dangled from her hand, and she took a deep breath. She had never been one to believe in signs or superstitions, but the events of the day gnawed at her. Was it just a fluke? Or was there something more going on with the horse, something she couldn't see, something hidden beneath the surface? Her fingers tightened around the keys. She knew she should drive home, let the experience settle, and try to make sense of it all. But her curiosity was stronger than her instinct to run. She needed answers. She had to understand what had happened, and why it had affected her so deeply. It was like she had been drawn into a story that she couldn't leave, no matter how hard she tried to pull herself away. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. She pulled it out and saw a message from a friend, someone who had heard about her trip to the stables. It was a casual message at first, asking how the visit went, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized that something wasn't right. Why had they been so curious about her day? It wasn't like they had ever shown much interest in horses before. She quickly typed a response, trying to keep her answers vague, but the nagging feeling in the pit of her stomach wouldn't subside. There was a sense of discomfort, like she was being watched, like the world around her wasn't as it seemed. As if, at any moment, things could unravel in a way she couldn't control. She couldn't let it go, though. She couldn't stop thinking about that horse, the way it had reacted to her presence. The strange connection that had almost been there between them. The more she thought about it, the more she began to question whether it was really the horse that was acting out of character or if it had been her all along. Later that evening, she lay in bed, her mind restless, her eyes tracing patterns in the darkness. The house was quiet, too quiet. Her thoughts wandered back to the stable, to the look in the horse's eyes. There was something intense, something beyond mere animal behavior. It wasn't just fear or anxiety. It was as if the animal knew something that only it could understand. And the fact that she had been involved, that she had been so close to it, unsettled her even more. She sat up, unable to shake the feeling that she was being drawn into a web she couldn't escape. What if the horse's behavior had been a warning? A warning for something to come? Her thoughts spiraled, tumbling over each other. She couldn't explain why, but she felt like she was on the edge of something much larger than herself. The next morning, she woke early, unable to sleep through the lingering thoughts. She stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection, trying to make sense of her feelings. The events of the day before had left an impression on her, one she couldn't shake. She had always been someone who preferred facts, who believed in logic and reason. But now, her mind was filled with questions she couldn't answer. There was no clear explanation for what had happened with the horse, and that uncertainty gnawed at her. She decided to return to the stable, to face whatever it was that had been calling her. She didn't know what she was hoping to find, but she couldn't ignore the pull anymore. Maybe it was the unanswered questions, or maybe it was the unsettling sensation that something had changed within her since that first encounter. Either way, she couldn't let go. The horse was waiting, and so was the mystery surrounding it. When she arrived, the stable seemed quieter than the day before. There was no sign of the stable owner. The horses were still in their stalls, the barn filled with the familiar scent of hay and leather. But something about the atmosphere felt different, as if the place itself was holding its breath, waiting for her to make the next move. She walked past the stalls slowly, her eyes scanning the faces of the horses, wondering if any of them knew what was happening. The horse she had met the day before stood in the farthest stall, its head hanging low, its eyes almost closed. But as she drew near, its ears perked up. It was as if it had sensed her before she even arrived. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. It wasn't just the horse, it was her own reaction. The tension from the day before had resurfaced, and this time, it was stronger. She knew she wasn't imagining it. Something was happening, something was building, but what it was, she couldn't say. She reached out slowly, her fingers brushing the wooden bars of the stall. The horse lifted its head, its gaze fixed on her, unblinking, as if waiting for something. A faint voice interrupted her thoughts. "He's still not himself." The stable owner had appeared, her voice soft but laced with a subtle edge of worry. The woman's eyes were focused on the horse, watching it with a mixture of concern and something else, something the young woman couldn't quite place. "He's been acting strange since yesterday," the stable owner continued, her voice barely a whisper. "I've never seen him like this before. I don't know what's going on, but I'm starting to wonder if it's more than just his usual quirks. Sometimes animals pick up on things we can't see. But this feels different." The young woman glanced at the horse again, her heart racing. Something in the stable owner's tone made her feel like they were on the edge of something much bigger. She wanted to ask more, to demand answers, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she simply nodded, unsure of what to say. The stable owner stepped closer, her eyes still on the horse. "I think you should be careful. Horses like him, they're not just animals. They have their own kind of knowing. And sometimes, that knowing is more than we can handle." The words hung in the air between them. The young woman felt a chill run down her spine. What was the stable owner trying to tell her? What did she mean by more than we can handle? Her mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. She couldn't let go of the feeling that something was unfolding, something she was meant to be a part of, but what that something was, she had no idea. All she knew was that the more she tried to ignore it, the stronger the pull became. The mystery of the horse, the strange energy between them, was only deepening, and she felt herself caught in a web that was only getting more tangled. The horse shifted in its stall, its eyes still locked on her. And in that moment, she realized she wasn't the only one waiting for something to happen. The tension in the barn was palpable. The young woman stood frozen, her heart hammering in her chest, her eyes never leaving the horse. The stable owner's words echoed in her mind. Something was off about the animal, something that went beyond just his behavior. And it wasn't just the horse. It was her too. She felt the connection between them, but it was like an invisible thread had been pulled taut between them, and any wrong move might snap it. The air in the barn felt thick, charged, as if it was holding its breath along with them. She could feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand up, a primal instinct telling her to leave, to run far away from this place, but her feet were rooted to the ground. She couldn't leave. Not now. Not when she felt like she was so close to understanding whatever was happening. The stable owner stepped closer to the horse, moving with slow, deliberate steps. She kept her voice calm, but there was an undercurrent of urgency there. "We don't know what's causing this," the stable owner murmured, her eyes darting from the horse to the young woman. "But something's not right. He's not acting like himself." The horse's gaze was fixed on them, unblinking, its eyes wide and knowing. Its nostrils flared as it breathed deeply, and the young woman could feel the tension radiating from it, from every muscle that was coiled in a readiness she couldn't explain. Something was building, she could feel it in the air, in the way her skin prickled, in the way the horse's energy seemed to grow stronger, more intense. Suddenly, the horse stamped its hoof against the ground. It was loud, sharp, the sound slicing through the quiet barn. The young woman jumped, her breath catching in her throat. The stable owner flinched, but didn't back away. She stepped forward, her hand held out toward the horse, trying to calm it. But the horse wasn't responding to her touch. It was as if it was beyond her control now. The young woman's stomach twisted. What was going on? Why had this escalated so quickly? What was this horse sensing, and why did it seem to have something to do with her? Without thinking, she stepped closer. Her fingers reached out, trembling, drawn to the horse in a way she couldn't explain. She wasn't sure if it was the fear, the pull of the connection, or something deeper, but she couldn't stop herself. She needed to know what was happening. She had to. The stable owner's hand shot out to stop her. "Don't," she said sharply, but the young woman barely heard her. All she could focus on was the horse, its eyes locked onto hers. The air around her crackled, and the weight of it pressed down on her chest. She could almost hear the pulse of something beneath the surface, a rhythm that matched the beat of her heart. In that moment, she saw something in the horse's eyes. It wasn't fear. It wasn't wildness. It was something more. Something ancient. The horse wasn't just reacting to her presence. It was aware of her, as if it had been waiting for her. The realization hit her like a wave. The pull she had felt, the unease, the strange connection, it wasn't a coincidence. The horse had been waiting for this moment. Before she could take another step, the horse let out a sharp, guttural sound, a noise that seemed to echo through the barn, vibrating through the floorboards. The young woman felt it deep in her chest, as if the sound reverberated through her very bones. The horse reared back on its hind legs, the power in its movement sending a rush of air through the barn, and the young woman took an instinctive step back, her heart racing. She could see the stable owner's face tighten with concern, but the woman felt frozen in place. The tension was building, rising with every passing second. The horse's hooves thudded back to the ground, and for a brief moment, everything was silent. It was like the world itself had paused, holding its breath, waiting for what came next. The young woman couldn't move. Her body was filled with a mix of fear and fascination, her mind struggling to keep up with the reality unfolding before her. It was like everything she had known was being turned upside down. There was something in the air, something wild and ancient, and it was pulling at her, calling her into something she wasn't sure she could control. The stable owner's voice broke the silence, but it was different now, urgent, low, almost a whisper. "Get back, now!" But it was too late. The horse's body was tense, its muscles rigid, and then, in one explosive motion, it charged forward. The sound of its hooves thundering against the barn floor shook the air around them, and the young woman stumbled backward, barely catching herself against the wooden beams of the stall. The horse was inches from her now, its body towering over hers, its breath hot against her skin. Her heart skipped a beat, her chest tight with panic. She wanted to move, to run, but her body refused to obey. It was as if the horse's presence was locking her in place, forcing her to confront whatever this was, whatever this connection between them meant. The world around her seemed to narrow, and all she could focus on was the horse, its wild eyes staring deep into hers, as though it was trying to communicate something that she wasn't ready to understand. The stable owner lunged forward, her hands grabbing the reins, pulling the horse back, her voice low but firm, commanding. The horse bucked, its powerful body twisting in the stall, but the stable owner held firm, her strength evident in every movement. Still, the young woman felt as though she were caught in a storm. There was no escape, no simple answer. The horse was acting like it had a purpose, and she was at the center of it. The barn seemed to hold its breath again, the tension so thick it felt suffocating. And then, as quickly as it had started, the horse stopped. It froze, its muscles trembling, its body still. The young woman could hear her own breathing, ragged and fast, as she stared at the horse. Something had shifted, but she didn't know what. She was shaken, her body trembling as she slowly, almost reluctantly, pulled herself back. She wanted to ask what had just happened, to demand an explanation, but the words stuck in her throat. The stable owner was breathing heavily, her face pale but determined as she moved to calm the horse. But the young woman didn't move. She couldn't. The encounter had changed her, had shown her something she couldn't understand, and a part of her was terrified of what that meant. Why had this horse reacted to her in this way? What had it been trying to communicate? And more importantly, why had she felt that connection, that unexplainable pull? The stable owner was talking, her voice low and tense, but the young woman barely heard her. She was still caught in the whirlwind of thoughts and emotions, her mind reeling. She had been close to something that had almost consumed her. And she had no idea if she was ready for what was coming next. The barn seemed quieter now, but it wasn't peaceful. The calm was a lie, a thin veneer that covered the rising storm beneath. She knew that whatever had just happened, whatever had been set in motion, wasn't over. In fact, she was only beginning to understand the magnitude of it. Something larger was at play here, and the answers she sought were still out of reach. But she knew one thing for sure: the horse wasn't the only one with a secret. And whatever it was drawing her in. The young woman's legs shook as she backed away from the horse, her mind still swirling with confusion. The barn, once filled with the sounds of hooves and the smell of hay, now seemed too quiet. Too still. The horse stood there, its body tense but unmoving, its eyes never leaving her. She could feel the weight of its gaze, heavy and searching, like it was trying to understand her, or maybe trying to make her understand something that was beyond words. She didn't know what it was, but the feeling was unmistakable. The air around her still hummed with that strange energy, like something was waiting to happen, something she couldn't predict. The stable owner, still trying to regain control of the animal, glanced at her, her face taut with worry. "You need to leave now," she said, her voice low but urgent. "Something's going to happen. I don't know what, but it's not safe here anymore." But the young woman wasn't ready to leave, not yet. She couldn't. It wasn't just the horse. It was the feeling that something far bigger was unfolding, something that tied her to this place, to this moment. The fear in the stable owner's eyes only confirmed it. Whatever had been triggered when she entered the barn, it wasn't over. Just then, the sound of footsteps echoed from the other side of the barn. The young woman turned sharply, her heart jumping into her throat. A figure emerged from the shadows, moving slowly toward them. At first, she thought it was just another worker or maybe someone else from the nearby farm, but as the figure stepped into light, her breath caught in her chest. It was a man, tall and weathered, his face hard with age and experience, his eyes cold but oddly familiar. His presence sent a chill down her spine. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, staring at the horse, his gaze piercing and intense. Then, slowly, he turned to the stable owner, his voice a low rasp. "He's waiting for her." The words hit the young woman like a slap. She felt her blood run cold. Waiting for her? The horse had been waiting for her? The realization was a shock, but it didn't make sense. How could it know her? She had never seen it before yesterday. She had never even been near horses until then. The man took a step forward, his boots thudding heavily on the barn floor. The stable owner tensed, her hands still gripping the reins. "What do you mean by that?" she demanded, her voice shaky. "What's happening? What's going on with this horse? And why is she involved?" The man's eyes flicked over to the young woman, and for the first time, he acknowledged her. His expression softened slightly, but there was still a coldness in his gaze. "She doesn't know yet," he said, his voice so quiet it barely carried across the barn. "But she will." The stable owner's face strained of color, and she looked at the man with a mixture of fear and disbelief. "You can't, this wasn't supposed to happen yet. You promised." "I never promised anything," the man interrupted, his voice sharp. "The time is now. There's no turning back." The young woman's mind raced. Time? Promises? What were they talking about? What did any of this have to do with her? She had no answers, only more questions and the feeling that she was at the center of something she didn't understand. Something that was about to explode. The horse shifted again, its eyes now locked on her. It was as if the animal could sense the growing tension, the rising stakes, and in that moment, the young woman realized that everything that had happened since she first set foot in the barn had led her to this point. She didn't know what was coming next, but she could feel it in her bones. The air around her was charged, and it was like the world was holding its breath, waiting for her to make a choice, to decide whether she was going to run or face whatever had been set in motion. The man stepped closer to her, his presence looming, his eyes never leaving hers. "You don't have a choice," he said, his words barely more than a whisper. "You're already part of this. And if you don't understand now, you will soon." The young woman's pulse quickened, her mind swirling with confusion and dread. What had she gotten herself into? She had thought it was just a visit to a stable, an innocent experience. But this was something far beyond that. This was something dark, something ancient, and somehow, she was caught in the middle of it. The stable owner stepped forward, her hand shaking as she let go of the reins, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and resolve. "You have to tell her," she said urgently, her voice breaking. "She has to know what's really going on. She has to understand why the horse is reacting like this, why it's so important." The man's jaw tightened, and for a long moment he said nothing. Then, finally, he nodded, a dark shadow crossing his face. "She needs to know. But be ready. There's no going back once the truth is out." The young woman's breath caught in her throat. Truth? What truth? Every instinct told her to leave, to run far away from this place, but she couldn't. Something was pulling her in, something she couldn't fight. She had to know. She had to understand what was happening to her, and why it felt like the world around her was unraveling. The man took a step back, his gaze never leaving her. "You've been chosen," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "The horse, the barn, this place, it's all connected to you. It's been waiting for you. Waiting for this moment." The stable owner's face twisted with anguish. "No. Not yet. She's not ready." The man's eyes flashed with impatience. "She doesn't need to be ready. It's already begun." The young woman felt her heart race, a flood of emotions crashing over her. She had no idea what they were talking about, no idea what was happening to her or what it meant that the horse had been waiting for her. But she knew, deep down, that the moment she stepped into the barn that day, her life had changed forever. There was no going back. The horse let out a low whinny, its gaze still fixed on her, its powerful body rippling with tension. Something in its eyes shifted, and for a brief moment, she thought she saw it. A flash of recognition, of understanding. The connection between them deepened in that instant, and she felt it too. It was as if she had been pulled into something far bigger than herself. Something ancient, something dangerous. And whatever was coming next, it was already too late to stop. The tension in the barn reached a breaking point. The young woman's heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing in the still air. Her mind was racing, trying to piece together what was happening, but every answer she came up with only raised more questions. The man's cryptic words echoed in her ears, "You've been chosen." Chosen for what? And why? And the horse? Why had it been waiting for her? The stable owner stood frozen, her face pale as the man's words sank in. The barn was heavy with silence, but it wasn't peaceful, it was charged, waiting for something to happen. The horse, its gaze never leaving the young woman, let out another low, unsettling whinny. It was like a signal, a warning. The young woman stepped forward, despite the fear twisting her stomach. She didn't know if it was bravery or sheer desperation. But she couldn't stay in the dark any longer. She had to know. The man watched her closely, his eyes narrowing as she took another step. "You're ready," he said, his voice soft but tinged with something dark. "The horse has been waiting for you to understand. It's not just a bond, it's a call." The words felt like a cold gust of wind, chilling her to the bone. A call? She had no idea what that meant, but the way he said it, the way the horse's eyes seemed to burn into hers, told her that the truth was something she was not prepared for. She took a deep breath and stood her ground, locking eyes with the horse. There was a moment, an unspoken exchange, and then, without warning, the horse stepped forward. The stable owner lunged forward to hold it back, but the horse was no longer reacting to her. Its attention was solely on the young woman, and she could feel its energy thrumming through the barn like an electric current. Before she could process what was happening, the man's voice cut through the air. "It's time. The moment has arrived." The young woman's breath hitched. She didn't understand. The moment? What moment? Her mind was spinning, but she knew one thing for certain: whatever was happening, it was bigger than her, bigger than anything she had ever known. The barn felt like it was closing in around her, the walls pressing in, suffocating her with the weight of everything she had just learned. She had to do something. Then, the horse made its move. It reared back on its hind legs, and for a moment, the young woman thought it might charge at her, but instead, it seemed to rise into the air, hovering for a split second, before landing gracefully back on the ground. The entire barn shook. It was like the very earth was vibrating beneath her feet. The horse's eyes gleamed, brighter than ever, and then everything fell into silence. For a long, breathless moment, the world stood still. The young woman couldn't move. She didn't know if it was fear or awe that had rooted her to the spot. She felt the air around her shift, like the world was adjusting to something new. And then it hit her. The realization washed over her like a tidal wave. She wasn't just a spectator here. She had always been part of this. The horse's connection to her was more than a chance encounter. It was a deep, inherent bond, one that had been pulling her here all along. The man's voice broke the silence again, this time with a finality that made her heart race. "You are the one who has the power to unlock it. The horse, he is a guardian, a protector. And you are the key to everything." The weight of his words settled on her chest, and she felt her legs go weak. The key? Protector? None of this made sense, and yet, something inside of her was awakening. She couldn't explain it, but she knew, deep down, that the horse wasn't just a creature, it was something ancient, something powerful. And it was bound to her. Before she could react, the barn door slammed open, and a gust of wind rushed in, carrying with it a strange, familiar energy. The young woman turned toward the door, her breath catching in her throat as a shadowy figure stepped into the barn. It was a woman, tall and regal, her face obscured by a hood. The air seemed to freeze when she stepped inside, as if the very elements were bending to her will. The stable owner froze, her face twisting in a mix of fear and surprise. No, it's too soon," she whispered under her breath. "She's not ready." The hooded figure stepped forward, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "She is," the figure said, her voice like 1,000 whispers all at once. "She always has been." The young woman's heart raced. Who was this person? And what did she mean by always has been? The world around her was spinning out of control. There were too many unanswered questions, too many pieces that didn't fit. The hooded woman raised a hand, and the horse responded instantly, lowering its head and stepping toward her. The young woman could feel the shift in the air as the creature obeyed the woman's command. It was like a puzzle piece falling into place, but she didn't know how to fit it all together. The horse wasn't just her connection, it was part of something much larger, something that had been waiting for this moment. "Do you understand now?" the hooded figure asked, her eyes locking onto the young woman. "This horse, this bond, it's a part of something that has been hidden for centuries. The guardians of the old world are awakening, and you, child, are the key." The young woman's blood ran cold. The key? She felt the weight of the words, but nothing made sense. She had never asked for any of this. She had never imagined that a visit to a stable would lead to this. But just as she was about to speak, the barn door slammed shut again, and the atmosphere shifted violently. The ground beneath her feet rumbled, and for a split second, she felt a powerful, ancient energy surge through her. The horse stepped back, its eyes filled with recognition. And then the shock hit. The stable owner's face twisted into something unrecognizable, a malicious smile creeping across her features. "You think you're ready, don't you?" she whispered, her voice dripping with venom. "You never were." The young woman froze, her blood running cold. The stable owner? She had been part of this all along? It was then that she understood. The stable owner wasn't just a bystander. She had been manipulating everything, pulling the strings from the shadows. She had wanted the horse's power for herself, but she had miscalculated. The man, the one who had seemed so intent on revealing the truth to her, stepped back in shock. "No, it can't be," he murmured, his voice low, almost frightened. "You betrayed us." The stable owner's smile only grew wider. "I never planned on handing it over. Not to anyone." The world around the young woman began to spiral, the walls of the barn shaking violently. She realized, with a chilling certainty, that her role in all of this wasn't just as the key. She was part of a far deeper conspiracy, and the forces she was about to unleash would either save or destroy everything she knew. The barn trembled again, the energy building to a fever pitch. The horse was no longer a symbol of protection. It was an anchor. And as the realization hit, she knew the true battle was only just beginning. The barn was shaking as if it had been caught in a violent storm, the wooden beams groaning under the pressure of the shifting energy. The young woman's heart raced, but the fear was different now. It wasn't just the uncertainty, or the unknown, it was the overwhelming sense that everything had been leading up to this moment, and there was no turning back. The stable owner's wicked smile only deepened the pit in her stomach. The air was thick with tension, and the horse, its powerful frame taut with anticipation, turned away from her. It seemed to sense the shift in the energy, its body tensing, ready to spring into action. The young woman couldn't look away from the animal, but now she saw it differently. It wasn't just a creature bound to her by fate, it was a protector, a guardian, and perhaps more than that. And whatever happened next, she was at the center of it. The stable owner stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with a sickening satisfaction. "You think you can stop me? You're nothing but a pawn in this game," she sneered. Her voice had changed, becoming darker, more menacing. "You have no idea what you're involved in, but you will. Soon enough, you'll understand that you were never meant to control the horse. You were meant to free it." The young woman's mind reeled as the words hit her. Free the horse? Was that what this was all about? It hadn't made sense before, but now, the pieces were starting to fall into place. The stable owner had never been on her side, she had been using the young woman as a tool all along, hoping to control the power of the horse. But why? What had she planned to do with it? Suddenly, the barn seemed smaller, the walls pressing in on her. It felt like the air itself was charged with raw, untapped power, ready to explode. The horse was restless, its movements sharp, calculated, as if it knew what was coming next. It seemed to recognize that its bond with the young woman wasn't just about protection, it was about something far greater. The stable owner's grip on the reins tightened, and for a moment, it seemed as though the woman might succeed in pulling the horse back to her side. But then, something changed. The young woman felt a surge of energy within her, a powerful force that came from deep within, something she had never felt before. She didn't know where it had come from, but it was unmistakable. The horse's eyes locked onto hers again, and in that moment, everything shifted. The young woman knew, without a doubt, that she was the one with the power now. The stable owner looked up in disbelief. "What have you done?" she demanded, her voice trembling with anger. She had never expected the young woman to take control of the situation, not like this. "You're not ready. You don't understand the power you're messing with." But the young woman stood her ground, her breath steady despite the chaos swirling around her. Maybe I don't understand everything, but I know what's right. The horse, sensing her newfound strength, responded in kind. It reared back on its hind legs once more, its powerful form radiating energy. The young woman felt the connection between them solidify, and she understood now what she had to do. With a sharp, commanding motion, she reached out, her hand extended toward the horse. It was like an unspoken invitation, a silent command. The animal hesitated for a brief moment, but only for a heartbeat, before it moved forward, its massive frame cutting through the charged air with ease. The stable owner stepped back, eyes wide with panic as the horse approached her, its powerful presence too much to bear. "No!" the woman shouted, her voice cracking. She attempted to grab hold of the reins, but it was clear that the connection between the horse and the young woman was stronger now. The animal wasn't under her control anymore. It was bound to the young woman, and nothing would change that. The stable owner stumbled back, realizing she had lost all control. Her expression twisted into one of rage and fear, but it was too late. She had miscalculated, underestimated the power of the bond between the young woman and the horse. She had thought she could manipulate the situation, control the power for her own gain, but now, she saw the truth. The young woman was the key, and the horse was never hers to control. The young woman stepped forward, her eyes locked on the horse, her pulse steady. She felt no fear now, only clarity. The power she had been seeking, the strength she needed, had always been within her. The horse wasn't just an animal. It was a symbol of something ancient, something powerful, and now, she understood her role in it. The stable owner reached for a knife hidden in her sleeve, her eyes wild with desperation. But before she could make a move, the young woman raised her hand. There was no need for words, no need for a struggle. The bond between them, the horse and the woman, was all that was needed. The air around them seemed to vibrate with energy. The ground shook beneath their feet, and the barn groaned, as if acknowledging the shift in the world. The horse moved toward the stable owner, and with one powerful shove, it sent her crashing into the far wall. She crumpled to the ground, unable to move, her plan shattered in an instant. The young woman didn't look back. She didn't need to. She had done what needed to be done. The stable owner's ambitions had come to an end, and now, it was time to face the truth. She turned her gaze to the horse, her heart swelling with gratitude and understanding. They had been through so much together, and now, it was time to set things right. She wasn't just the key to the horse's power, she was its equal. The bond between them was unbreakable, and together, they could face whatever lay ahead. The barn began to settle, the energy slowly dissipating as the storm calmed. The horse stood tall beside her, its presence comforting and powerful. The young woman took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. Everything had changed. She had changed. As the barn door creaked open, the wind carried with it a sense of finality. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a soft, golden light through the cracks in the barn. It was over. The power had been reclaimed, and the secrets that had lingered in the shadows had been revealed. But there was still so much left to learn. So much left to understand. She stepped outside, the horse following closely behind her. The stable was behind them now, and though the world felt different, it also felt like the beginning of something new. The young woman knew that whatever came next, she would face it with the strength of the bond she shared with the horse. Together, they had faced the darkness, and together, they would step into the light. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was hers to walk. As the horse took its first steps into the open air, the young woman smiled. She knew the journey wasn't over, it had only just begun. And as the sun broke through the clouds, casting a warm glow over the land, she felt a sense of peace. The power of the horse was hers to guide, and with it, she would find her way.